I love building in games, and for my latest project, I wanted to make a cottagecore aesthetic build in Planet Zoo. For the uninitiated, cottagecore is an aesthetic that's been pretty popular on the internet for the past 5 to 10 years or so. The easiest way to describe the essence of cottagecore is as a yearning for a simpler life. A life free of modern-day worries like paying rent and sitting in traffic, where you can enjoy a closer relationship with nature and independence from industrial farming or fast fashion. Obviously, a life like that is filled with its own struggles, but those struggles are so far away from anything most of us experience that they're virtually invisible to us. All we see is the romance of a peaceful life in the countryside. We don't think of growing our own food and sewing our own clothes as work, we think of it as freedom. So for this build, I didn't just want to capture the visual aesthetic of cottagecore, but also that fantasy of a simpler life. Let's take a peek at the build process. So I ended up going with a completely flat diorama to start with. I didn't do any terrain elevation work, and I started on the cottage first because I kind of wanted that to be the focus, because I mean it's a cottagecore diorama, right? It's gotta have a nice cottage in it. So I ended up doing research on kind of what materials would have been used to make this popular type of English cottage. There's some variety in there, obviously. There's some wood, there's some stone, but the thing that I was hearing the most was made with local materials, right? And I ended up making mine with stone mainly because I really liked the idea of these I liked the look of these stone cottages I was seeing with like wooden beams and that kind of thing. So I went with a stone cottage with wooden details essentially. One of the things I really, really wanted in the cottage from the start was a little porch like this, you know, with these little wooden steps on it that I'm making right now. And I just kind of I put a little bit more detail into it over time. And obviously here I'm just erasing some of the tall grass so that the grass doesn't poke out of the indoor flooring, you know what I mean? Yeah, we definitely don't want indoor grass, right? So anyway, here I decide to go with a bit of a thicker wooden beam size. The thinner beam size wasn't really doing it for me, and this way it was kind of consistent with the rest of the beams I was using. And this whole little roof area, the roof on the patio the roof on the porch I'm also really proud of. I mean, obviously, the roof itself is a pre-made part, but the beams I'm using to support it, that was all placed by me. And I mean, it's just kind of a cube, but I like it anyway. Next, I ended up going with the windows, and I really are those the Twilight Pack windows that I'm using? They might be the Twilight Pack windows. Anyway, I'll have to take a peek at that later, but I really like the way that they look, and just kind of the retro style that they've got going on. So I ended up putting those in there, and I put some wooden beams there as well to separate them, because obviously, right now, they're just floating in midair, and we don't want that. So I figured the easiest way to make them look better would just be to use wooden beams, and it just so happens that these, wooden beam type, decorations are really popular in older cottages as well. So I was kind of going with, the actual cottage style this way. Also, at this point, I realized that the roof on the cottage is way too high. So at this point, I'm trying to downsize the whole thing, just chop a little bit off the top. And I honestly didn't think that would work, but it ended up going great. It ended up just being super easy to downsize it a little bit. If I could have gotten away, I probably could have gotten away with a second floor with how tall it was, but I just didn't feel like doing that. I wanted a single floor cottage. So that's what I ended up going with, was just a bit of a tall ceiling single floor cottage. Fortunately, the adjustment was surprisingly easy to make once I figured out how to do it. And I elevated the patio just a little bit higher to kind of go with the roof. Also at this point, I was trying to fit a doorway in here, but it wouldn't actually fit with the new roof size. So what I ended up doing was making it into a doggy door instead of a standard human door, and this fit perfectly, and it's also hilarious and cute. There's all kinds of neat patterns that are made with these wooden beams as well in these older kind of cottage style homes. And I actually spent a lot of time on these beams, just getting everything just right. I've cut out a little bit of it so that you guys don't have to watch me struggle a lot with them. And here you get a good view of the doggy door as well. I also feel like at this point the cottage is really starting to come together. The cottage itself, obviously, we haven't even started on the garden yet. So the next thing I'm doing is more of these wooden beam patterns. I ended up figuring out that it was easiest to do if I broke the walls into, like, thirds. At least this particular wall, this, like, side wall. And I think in the finished build I actually have some beams sticking out a bit still. I'll have to fix that before I put it on the workshop, which I do plan to do. I do plan to put the cottage itself on the workshop. It'll actually be my first workshop item, so I'm excited to see how that goes, like if anybody's actually interested in using it. Making the patterns look regular took a lot of, like, meticulous effort, but I think it really paid off. I think it looks really good. Next, of course, I had to add a chimney. It just looks so cozy and nice. It looks so cozy and nice with the chimney. And then I went back to work on the patio again. So we actually have this little fence that I'm making, which is kind of like, you know, just like a fence on the patio, you know what I mean? It's not called a fence. What would it be called? Like a railing? I don't know. But either way, this was fun to make. And I think it really adds a lot to the build. Like just the patio itself. Honestly, there's a huge variety of things you can do just with a single type of wooden beam, you know what I mean? Just copying and pasting that stuff. They're extremely flexible. And with the gate done here, I'm starting on the garden itself. I wanted there to be a lot of tall grass here, so I basically only put, like, dirt and, well, I guess it's just dirt, really. I didn't put any sand there. But I only put, like, the dirt down on the path to the backyard, essentially. So there's not actually a huge amount of variety in terrain here. And then the next step I had to take was, of course, making an arbor with ivy on it, because this is very, I feel like, very iconic of old, you know, European cottages. The ivy itself, like, the ivy alone is really iconic, like, European, cozy, you know, country home type kind of, like, vibe, right? I just wanted to put the ivy everywhere, so some of it kind of, like, grows down on the ground, and some of it grows over top of the roof. One touch that I really liked was the ivy growing, like, down from the roof, but especially, like, overlapping with the windows. I really like when the ivy overlaps with the windows. It just gives such a cozy vibe, and you can see it from the indoors, too, which is really nice. I feel like the windows themselves are, like, every window is their own view, right? Like a view inside or outside. It's its own frame. So, like, just breaking up the frame itself with, you know, ivy or whatever kind of cover you want to use is, like, really good, in my opinion. I don't know. I think it can be used in a lot of flexible ways. So then I just started with, you know, the other flora in the area, in the garden itself. So I wanted to make the path to the backyard really overgrown. Or, like, look really overgrown. You know, the kind of thing where you'll be heading out to the backyard and, you know, you'll get leaves all over your dress or whatever. For the trees, I didn't want to have too many, because I figured, like, most of the area around the yard would probably be used for, like, maybe planting vegetables or something like that. So I really liked this tree that's, like, out in front on the left and then a couple out back, just to break up the horizon a little bit. And then for flowers, I ended up adding a lot of ground cover really early, like, you know, like these yellow flowers. There's a bunch of, what are those yellow flowers? I don't remember what kind those are, but, like, the tall ones. I added a bunch of those, added a number of bushes. There's some dog rose bushes in there somewhere. There's this other kind on the right. There's some kind of rose bush, I think. But I struggled a little bit in the beginning with the garden because I was having trouble kind of, like, texturing things. Like, I had all kinds of ground cover and a little bit of color. But, like, speaking from a vertical, you know, like, there wasn't any way to break up the view, or just, like, strictly from a shape standpoint, the whole backyard, or, well, in the front yard too, we're kind of looking flat. And another thing I was somewhat struggling with was color, because I had a lot of green, obviously, a lot of yellow, and a lot of white. And actually later on in the build, I showed the work in progress to a friend who suggested red, and I ended up going with pink. Oh, there is a little bit of red, but mostly I ended up going with pink. And I think that adds a lot to it, actually. And here I'm starting on rock work. I mainly just wanted to do rocks around the border of the diorama, so that it doesn't just look like, you know, a cube. I think it adds a lot of interest as well. It can also give you, like, it can give you that variance in shape, you know, that can help guide you, you know, where do I want to put this plant, that kind of thing. And you can have grass peeking out in between rocks, and that's always fun to put plants there, you know? Because if you put too many rocks just, like, overlapping on each other, it just looks like, you know, there's just this huge rock formation, right? But if there's, you know, grass and flowers peeking out from behind them, it looks more like, you know, there's just some rocks, and there's just some boulders hanging out there. And it's not like a mountain or anything like that. Oh, and another thing I forgot to mention is that I did place a bench down, and I had to place a null path to do so, because you can't place benches unless you have, you know, a walkable path there. And this was actually, this is a new feature to Planet Zoo where you can have paths that are completely invisible. So you can see that kind of, when I'm placing objects, there's like a little white outline around the path itself. But I really wanted a bench in the front yard, and I'm really pleased with how it turned out in the end. By the way, if you ever want to, like, apply a bench in this way, but you just don't want the path to be there, you can just delete it after you place the bench. I always try to do rocks in such a way that, like, I get the I get the bigger rocks out there first, and then kind of fill in the spaces that need a bigger variety in shape, or simply need to be filled in with the smaller rocks. So I kind of do this with foliage as well, where I try to do trees first, you know, foliage that takes up more space. I try to do that first, and then I kind of fill everything in with detail, you know, the smaller foliage or what have you, later on. I was really happy with some of these little stone details along the path. I wanted the path to look like it was, you know, walked on a lot, I guess, and not so much that it was a gravel path, but that it was dirt that had been, you know, kind of like grass that had been stomped on a bunch, because you're always going from the front yard to the backyard. And it's like I said earlier, adding these little details of, like, flowers, you know, kind of pushing up through the gaps in the rocks, I think that always just looks really satisfying to me. Eventually I ended up taking a break from the rock work, and you can't really see the color too great right now because it's in the shade, but I really love these pink azaleas that I put down. And after that, I did end up adding the foxes to the diorama finally. If you're really observant, you can see on the left side of the house that there is the path from... Oh, and there's the staff area, which is just an island outside of the diorama. But yeah, we have foxes now. And at this point, I kind of realized that, like, the path to the backyard wasn't quite the way I wanted it to be. It wasn't quite the, you know, overgrown mess that I had imagined it as. So I'm trying to kind of, like, fill it in, but it gets hard when you want to, you know, make something a bit overgrown, because you want to put a lot of foliage in there, but you also want each piece of foliage to be very intentional, you know? So that's just a lot of pieces to place very intentionally. The front yard didn't quite feel right, but I think adding, like, just a small rock made a huge difference in it, weirdly. Then I kind of, like, rediscovered these planters, and I really like what they have added to the scene as well. At first I was going to put them next to the bench, but then I felt like the bench was kind of just, like, a little bit too much the focus of the scene. So I put them right next to the house. And besides, you're not going to want to go, you know, walk out to the bench every day to water, you know, your flowers. You just go outside on the patio and water them, you know? Then again, I guess if you're a fox, like, can foxes water, you know, like, flowers? I guess they can. And the foxes are the ones who live in the house, so... Anyway, they're growing tomatoes as well. I guess the foxes are growing tomatoes. I really wanted to add this out back, because I wanted there to be some kind of, you know, actual edible gardening bit going on. So I'm filling this, I also just wanted to fill this little basket with, you know, some vegetables that were harvested and some gardening tools. I'm not sure if that's actually what this basket is supposed to be used for, but that's generally what I use it for when decorating in this game. And I know I mentioned earlier that a friend of mine had suggested adding some more red to the scene, and I kind of tried putting some more azaleas in there, which gives it a little pink touch, and I actually really like how that turned out. We also have that little tree stump in back for sitting on. I feel like this is the point at which the path out to the backyard started really coming together for me. It felt like overgrown, but slightly neatly, I guess, like neatly overgrown, or like intentionally overgrown, I guess, which is kind of the point, right? I also started using this bush to do kind of like, you know, just sinking it into the ground to give it a little bit of, you know, some surface cover look. And I did that in a bunch of places around both the front yard and the backyard, and I think it worked really well. There's just a series of like really small decorating decisions that I'm making here, like putting that yellow flower next to the tree in front to break up the horizon a little bit. And I think this is the last item that I add, is actually this little rock, just to give a little bit of texture to this ground here, where the fox's food toy is. So you already know how the build turned out, but I'm going to give you another look at it anyway, because I'm really happy with it, and I also want to say thank you for watching. I worked really hard on this build, and it's great to know that, you know, people are going to be enjoying it just like I enjoyed it. Feel free to leave a comment if you have any suggestions for future builds or just any feedback at all. And if you liked this video, a like or subscribe really helps me out as a small creator. Anyway, like I said, thank you for watching, and I hope to see you in my next video.